Last night, Will Richardson gave a talk to parents on schools on the brink, how schools are being reimagined for a world of networked learning. And Will talked about 9 elephants in the classroom, or 9 elephants in the room, and talked about what we know about learning and don't or avoid talking about. Well, the 9 elephants were related to topics that we certainly have had on our agenda over the last few years, and it's something that we have been talking about and debating as a community. We have our visitors from NEASC and CIS actually with us this afternoon, but there's been several meetings with them, and it's clear to me that we have, and to the visitors, that we have an exciting and courageous vision for this school. But the key to our success, to achieving our vision, is not the parents, nor the students, nor the outside agencies like CIS or NEASC, but the key is the faculty and the faculty's capacity to embrace and to help us achieve what's best for our students. One of the comments that Will made last night was that we need to allow faculty to grieve for the sense of loss. Because if we are excellent, and you are excellent teachers, the world is changing, and we need to change, we need to evolve, not because what we do is wrong, or not because we can't achieve the goals through the methods you're using, but because the goals are changing. And that sense of constantly evolving, constantly changing, if you're excellent at what you do and you're doing it so well, and you've been doing it so well for many years, I understand is challenging. I understand it's difficult. And having conversations about topics of the world changing and how education is changing is something important for us as a school, faculty and staff to talk about. Will Richardson is a parent, an educator, he's been an educational leader, and he's an author. And this afternoon, he will challenge us to consider the opportunities that learners have in today's world. And I hope that the conversations that we have today and after today continue to support the direction that we're taking in the best interest of our kids. We will aim to finish, will aim to finish at 5 minutes to 5 to give short time for questions. I understand many of you will have to leave at 5, but if some of you want to stay on for more questions, he has a train to catch, but he will stay till 5:15 for those who can stay to ask more questions. So I'm going to hand it straight over to Will to talk about This is Personal, Modern Learning in Self-Determined Classrooms. So please welcome Will Richardson.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon. How are you? How are you? Good. Okay, good. I just want to tell you, I had a great tour of your primary school from 2 young men who took me to every nook and cranny of the place. I saw all sorts of tires and bamboo shoots and all sorts of stuff. But the highlight of the tour was when I was walking through one of the classrooms, a young girl looked up at me. She goes, "I saw you speak last night." And I looked at her and I said, "What'd you think?" She goes, "Too long." I was like, well, thank you very much. Okay, but I got the message, so I'm going to be not too long this session. I'm going to go for only about 50 minutes. I think I subjected the parents to about 90 minutes last night, so I'm going to cut it short. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I wish I had more time to spend because this seems like just an amazing place for kids and for adults too. I mean, it's a beautiful school, and your kids are just fantastic. But what I wanted to try to do in 50 minutes is kind of push your thinking and try to challenge you and at least leave you with some questions that you can talk about and engage in some conversations around, because I think this is just a very interesting time to be in education. Just briefly, my background, really briefly. I taught in a public school for 22 years. I was an administrator for 3 years. I've been blogging and being online in social spaces for 17 years now. I was like one of the first people to start a blog in education, so I'm really old in the tooth when it comes to social media and that kind of stuff. But I'm here more than anything as a parent, and I'm going to talk about one of my kids, not that I don't love my daughter, but my daughter is kind of 3 years removed from school now, and my son, actually, Tucker, just graduated. And he went to my old school where he had a lot of my old friends who were teachers there, and he had a very, by all kind of traditional measures, a very successful experience at Hunter and Central. But I'm going to be honest and tell you that I wasn't very impressed with the learning that he did there. In fact, I've been more impressed with the learning that both of my children have done outside of school rather than inside of school. Because the learning I see them doing outside of school, using the technologies that they have, and my kids are privileged, they have a lot of access and they have a lot of tools, but the learning that they do on their own is really meaningful to them and very powerful in their lives. And there's this dissonance that I noticed that kind of grew over time between their passion for learning out here and their kind of not so much passion for learning inside of school, even though they did really well. Tucker graduated with a 3.6. Got a, I don't know, 29 or 30 on the ACT. I mean, so by those traditional measures, he did great. But I want to show you where Tucker's real classroom was in terms of where he wanted to be more than anything else. He ended up being a really, really good basketball player to the tune of free college, actually. He's got a full scholarship to play Colgate starting next year, which is just a tremendous accomplishment on his part. And he had some great coaches and teachers along the way, there's no doubt about that motivated him, and I hope his parents played some role in getting him to that, but probably not so much. But I really think that part of his success, and this may not be true for all kids, but part of his success was the access that he had to basketball in lots of different formats. That if he wanted to learn a particular dribble, or if he wanted to just watch really high-level players play and learn from watching them, he now has access to about 500,000 basketball tutorial videos and things like that. And he spent a lot of time on these, let me tell you. He was almost, not constantly, but whenever he was on his phone, he wasn't doing stupid stuff. I don't consider that stupid stuff. He was watching and he was learning and he was taking it all in and trying to make sense of how could he use what he was finding there in his game to make himself better, to learn how to do his craft even at a higher level. And like I said, he needed his coaches in that physical space world in order to do that, but this was a pretty interesting addition to that I find very, very interesting, not in just the context of basketball, but in the context of just about anything now that we can learn. It's complex, it's not simple, but it is powerful. And I really want to take a dive into that because I think this moment is just fascinating if you can step back from it and kind of see it as it is. And it's really hard to do that, by the way. I mean, because we don't have a lot of perspective on the change that's happened in the last 15 years, but we know it's been huge. And we can see it in politics, mercy. We can see it in politics, we can see it in business, we can see it just about everywhere in terms of how the web and how those technologies are connecting us and changing the nature of what we do and pushing kind of a lot of those traditional ways that we think about things. And I think it's a huge opportunity for learners. In fact, I don't imagine there's ever been a more amazing time to be a learner than right now. If there's something that you want to learn and you have a passion for it, you don't have to wait to go somewhere to learn it. You don't have to necessarily be with someone, a teacher in the traditional sense, to learn it. And I'm going to talk more about that in a second, but it's pretty amazing when you step back and think about it. But man, is this hard for schools. This is a really challenging moment for schools that I'm not sure we fully understand, and I'm not sure we fully want to even understand. Because if we do start to look at the world in a learning context, it does challenge a lot about what we are and a lot about what we do. And I'm going to get into that a little bit too as well. But that's where the very interesting conversations are. Now, I think there are three parts to this. And again, I apologize for going fairly quickly through this, but like I said, I want to give some time at the end to get at least a couple questions in. But I think there are three parts of this. And I think the whole conversation around modern learning or learning in general actually starts with, what do you believe about how kids learn most powerfully and deeply? What are your beliefs? Have you articulated your beliefs? And rhetorically, I want to ask you, how many of you have written down what you believe about how kids learn? how many of you, if I went up to you and asked you, what is learning, how many of you could answer that? That you've thought about it, that you have an answer or a definition around that word, because that is the most important word in our work. I can't think of a word that's more important than learning when it comes to educators. And I wonder, in this particular place, if I went to 20 different people and asked what is learning, how many different answers I would get. And I wonder, if I got 20 different answers, what the implications of that are for kids. So I think it all starts with your beliefs. What do you believe? How are you articulating them? And then how are you living your beliefs? It's always nice to have your belief statement on the website. Not if you're not living them. Then they're just words. Then they don't really mean much. And by the way, I ask that all the time. What's the mission? You all have a mission statement. You all have a vision statement on the website. I'm not asking, but I'm wondering how many of you could tell me what it is. And how many of you are really living what it is. And how many of you, like me, have not turned your phones off. Sorry about that. So that's number one. The second piece of this, though, is not just what you believe about how kids learn and about how learning happens, but how is the world changing? How much do you really know about how the world is changing? How much do you really understand the new contexts? And what I mean by context specifically are contexts for learning. How much do you fully understand about how the affordances of technology now are impacting our ability to learn and what those changes look like? And I think that's a really important piece of it, because these two things, what you believe and what you understand, and whether that's technology or brain science or whatever else, what you understand about how learning happens, have to be the things that inform your practice. They have to be the things that, when I look at what you do in the classroom, can I see what you believe? Are your beliefs apparent to me if I'm observing what you do? And is it also obvious to me that you understand how the world has changed? I mean, I go into a lot of classrooms, I observe a lot of teachers. I think a lot of teachers emulate their beliefs, even though they may not have articulated them. Not so many people really emulate their understanding of how the world looks today. A lot of what I see could probably be a 19th, certainly a 20th century kind of environment or interaction or whatever's happening in there. So I think these three things as they intersect, and I think all of them are really important. I mean, you can imagine if you have the beliefs and the context, but you're not putting them into practice, that's probably ineffective. I mean, there's probably not really much happening there. If you don't have the contexts, then you are probably irrelevant in some ways, because what you're doing doesn't hew to the way the real world works. And if you don't have the beliefs, then you probably are really inconsistent. And to be honest, that's the one that kind of drove me nuts as a parent, because my kids had to go to block 1 and figured out what that teacher believed about learning, then went to block 2 and figured out something totally different, then went to block 3, same thing, block 4. And so it was like they had to spend time figuring out, how do I succeed in this particular classroom, because there is no consistent narrative or belief system around what learning is as I go through my day. And a lot of people will say, well, kids need to learn how to adjust, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm not sure that that's the best way to do that. I think it's much better for kids if they have some consistent ideas and can think about it and can practice it in different ways. So it's an interesting moment, but the challenge is that this place doesn't want to change. Institutions, by and large, do not want to change. Because if they do, that means they are acknowledging that their purpose has changed. If you are to change dramatically what you do in classrooms, how you think about learning, how you think about an education, then you are acknowledging that what you are currently doing is not effective, is not really helping kids to get to flourish in their worlds for whatever reason. So it's a very difficult conversation to have. It's a very, very difficult position to put yourself in. It's a very difficult position even to allow yourself, in many cases, to really sit back and go, is what I am doing as an educator right now the most relevant thing that I can be doing for children at the moment? Is it the best I can do for kids given the circumstances of this moment? So let's talk about the beliefs thing first. So I think without question, the most important question that we have to ask is this: what do you mean when you say that word? What do you mean when you say that word? And I'll tell you, as I kind of alluded to before, very rarely do I go to places where there's consistency and coherence around this word. And you can kind of see this writ large, right? Even though that should be the North Star question, we struggle with this. So let me tell you a story. Lawrenceville Prep, I don't know, some of you may be familiar with Lawrenceville Prep. It's a school outside of Princeton, New Jersey. It's about 20 minutes from where I live. Probably one of the most prestigious prep schools in the country, one of the most successful prep schools in the country by traditional measures. Good on them. They decided to run a little bit an experiment a few years ago where they took a class of their juniors, and when those juniors came back as seniors in September, they gave them the final exam from the science class that they had taken in the spring. They gave them that final cold in September because they wanted to see how well they would do on that test that they took in June and really hadn't done much studying or thinking about, probably, right? So in June, it's a good school. They did pretty well, 87. Anyone want to guess what they got in September as an average? Not bad, 58. 58. And I wondered, to be honest, how many of us would be willing to do this experiment? I wonder how many of us would be willing to conduct this experiment. Give the test in June, give it back to them in September and see what happens. I wonder what they would get if they took that same test the following June. And the question becomes not that they're, why did they get so, well, which one of those represents learning? Is the 87 what they learned? Is the 58? So we have to think about this word and we have to talk about it and figure out what it means because, number one, we know that most of what kids learn in a class is quickly forgotten. And we know that because if we're honest with ourselves, most of what we learned in classrooms was quickly forgotten. We probably would have gone from a 87 to a 58 too if we were those kids taking those tests. So my kid would be freaking if he knew I was showing you his grades, but basically, where's the learning show up here? Where do I, as a parent, or a college admissions officer, or anyone else looking at this, do you have any idea what he learned? You have no idea what he learned. I can tell you what he learned in calc. He learned he didn't like calc. That's one thing he learned. And he learned that in some other classes too. But this is really kind of interesting to me. And the parents last night, I kind of hammered them on the whole grade thing because it's, and we were talking, actually I was doing a session today with another group, and I said, well, what if we just told the parents, well, everybody gets 100? Because that's what parents seem to want, a lot of them. They want the grade. Okay, so everybody gets 100. What would they do in that case? Would they go, whoa, wait, I didn't really mean. It's interesting. And it is not so much about the stuff that we test for. It is more about curiosity. It is more about an intrinsic love, and we all know that. That is, everybody knows that. That learning is really about the things that we care about, the passions that we have, etc. So we get kids who write essays, and this one up in Medium, it's not that they hate school, but school changes. School absolutely changes. And there was a parent last night who was talking about this change, where she said up until through the middle school, basically her son was coming home and he was pretty happy and content, and then he came home after starting in the high school and basically was saying, why do I have to sit like that? Why do I have to ask permission to do this? Why do I have to do this thing? It's a very different, seemed like to me, a very different kind of narrative of learning. And I think it echoes this because it didn't sound like about the learning piece of it. It was about the grade part of it and how important that is. And kids know this. Kids aren't stupid. Kids come into school all the time and say, what do I need to do to get the A? What do I need to do in order to succeed on the grade? Very rarely do kids come into school going, especially in high school, going, what am I going to learn? What am I going to learn in this classroom? So we struggle with this. And in the States right now, we have this I don't know what's going on. We have this fetish for adding the adjective in front of the noun. So we're going to flip it, we're going to blend it, we're going to personalize it, we're going to binge it, we're going to collaborate, we're going to do all this kind of stuff, right? And I just wonder why we do this. Why do we feel the need to put an adjective in front of the noun? And by the way, if we're honest about it, we all know that's really not blended learning or personalized learning or flipped learning. It's flipped teaching. It's blended teaching. It's personalized teaching. But we like to throw this learning word in there. I don't know why we do it. If we could define the word, I don't think we need the adjectives. I really don't. Because it's just learning. But we struggle with this word. So Seymour Saracen wrote this book. That's the title of the book. And what do you mean by learning? And he said, anybody who's talking about doing anything different in schools will not succeed unless they answer this question, unless they come to some coherence around this. So I'm going to tell you Saracen's answer, which kind of changed my world when I read it. And Saracen was introduced to me by Gary Steger, who was here last year. I've just become such a huge Saracen fan. But anyway, his definition is this: productive learning is when the learning engenders wanting to learn more. Absent wanting to learn more, the context is probably unproductive. And if you guys all do a gut check right now, I think you'd agree that the things that you have learned most powerfully and deeply in your lives are the things you wanted to learn more about. Yeah? Anyone in here an expert at something they find boring as all get out? Have yet to meet one. They are about the things that we want to learn more about. Those are the things we learn. The things we don't want to learn more about, 87 to 58. That's pretty much how those things go. So that's pretty interesting. Where's the wanting to learn more grade there? Where do I get the sense of, what does Tucker want to learn more about? I think I told you what he wants to learn more about. He wants to learn how to become a better basketball player. But there's no grade for that. There's no understanding of that. And in the absence of him wanting to learn more about the things that he's learning in the classroom, I'm sorry, most of what he's learned in the classroom, he's already offloaded. It doesn't stick. And it doesn't stick for us either. This isn't just a kid thing. It's about relevance, and it's about interest, and it's about actually using it. So the question for me then becomes, so if we want to create productive learning environments where kids want to learn more, well then what are the conditions under which that happens? And so for the last 3 years, I've been going around the world asking this question: what are the conditions under which deep and powerful learning take place? And you can think about that in your heads right now. If I had the time, I'd ask you, we'd get into a conversation about it, but I don't have the time. But I'm going to predict what's in your head right now, because everywhere that I go, people say almost the exact same things. What is required for really deep learning to happen? Learning that makes you want to learn more. What are the conditions for that to happen? Almost anything that was in your brain is probably up there. It requires passion. It requires a real purpose. It requires time. It's not split up by ages or like time fragments. It's flow. It's fun. I mean, I don't think any of you would argue that these conditions are needed, because those are the conditions that exist for you guys when you learn powerfully as well. The fascinating thing to me is, 3 years I've been asking this question, and I bet you I'm over 100,000 people now that I've asked this question to it and had conversations with them about. Here's what they never say when I ask them, what are the conditions for deep and powerful learning to happen in classrooms? No one ever says that. Not one person has ever said that. Yet, when I visit classrooms, when I go into schools, when I look at what's happening in classrooms, most people live more on the right-hand side of this slide than they do on the left-hand side. And I think that that's a problem. Because if this is true, then we are not doing what we believe leads to deep and powerful learning in our classrooms. There is a gap between what we believe and what we do. And that's a problem. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that gap. And there are a lot of people who say, well, but we have this or these tests or what. I get it, and that's fine. And those are complex and difficult. I'm not saying any of those barriers are necessarily easy to overcome. But I think we got to own this. I think we have to at least admit this. In most cases in schools, we're really not doing the best we can in terms of creating environments for learning, productive learning, sticky learning to happen. Now, I don't think it's rocket science. In fact, I know it's not rocket science. You don't need a lot of research to tell you the stuff that's on the left, because we all live it. But it is this difference between being efficient, and most of the stuff we do on the right-hand side is because it's in the efficiency model. It's just easier for us to break kids up into different age groups. It's easier for us to split things up into different subjects. It's easier for us to have 50-minute blocks or 80-minute blocks or whatever you want. It's easier for us to just use a grading system that ends up in the parent portal. That's, you know what I'm saying. That stuff felt easier for us, but is that all that stuff better for kids? I doubt if I said to any of you, okay, all the 35-year-olds, would you please get up and go to the back corner and you can only talk to the rest of the 35-year-olds for the rest of the day. I doubt any of you would go, oh, that's a good idea. I think most of you go like, well, what are you talking about? Yet we do that when it comes to the way we group kids. And if you really want to get edgy about it, there's a guy, Russell Acuff, who says, you know, we're really doing the wrong thing right. We're trying really hard in schools to do the wrong thing right. And he says it's better to do the right thing wrong than it is to try to do the wrong thing right. And at the end of this quote, he says, and don't forget, the righter you are at doing the wrong thing, the wronger you get. So, are we doing the right thing? That's the question I think that we have to ask. Now, and that's where imagination starts, by the way. And I just want to make this point. I didn't make this last night, but I want to make this point. You know, this, you want to move to this? It's not that hard. And by the way, it requires zero technology to do this, by the way. A lot of people say, well, we don't have the this is not about technology at all. You can create conditions like this in your classrooms without any technology. But if you have the technology, well, then it does get kind of interesting. Then it becomes kind of powerful. So, why is this crucial now? Why do we really have to own this and think about this now, this gap between what we believe and what we do? Well, that's where the contexts come in, because the world has changed. The world is changing, and it's changing in a learning context, not just a technology context, although technology is what affords the learning to happen differently. But this is a huge moment of change, like I said, in just about every arena, and especially so in education. The reality of it is, this place was not built for 2017. It just wasn't. This place was built for a world that said, if you want to learn algebra, then you have to come here on this particular day, at this particular time, in this particular classroom, with these particular kids who are your particular age, probably from your particular neighborhood, to go through this particular curriculum at this particular pace and be assessed in this particular way by this particular teacher. That's pretty good. Because if you don't go through that experience, you may not learn algebra. 2017, algebra is everywhere. Everything you teach is now everywhere. Everywhere. If it's about content, you cannot compete. Because basically, now we are looking at a world where it is abundant with all of the things that schools used to provide. So, we now have pretty much the sum of human knowledge in our pockets. And yeah, I look at this and I go, I get it. There's a lot of crap represented in that picture. There's a lot of bad information, fake news. And if you don't have the literacies to discern the truth from fiction, you're in trouble right now. But on balance, this is a pretty interesting development. And there's not a person in this room that doesn't take advantage of it. There's not a person in this room that doesn't go online every now and then on YouTube and go, how do I change a muffler, or cook pasta, or file for divorce? Whatever it is that you're looking at, right? You guys are a tough crowd, I gotta tell you. That was my Rodney Dangerfield moment there. What do you want? But you get my point, right? So, on balance, I think this is a pretty interesting development. You also have access now, where we'll have access to 5 billion people who will be online at the end of this decade, and this is a really powerful one. In fact, I think this is the most powerful one, but this is also the scariest one. Because there's a lot of crap represented in this picture too. And if you can't discern the good people from the bad people, then you're going to get in trouble. You're going to have your identity stolen, you're going to be bullied, you're going to, whatever, right? But this is really important, and this is the one thing that I'm not sure educators fully understand, and so I'm going to just give you a little test and make sure you're awake, and hopefully you'll play along. If you could all raise your right hands right now for me, please. Just raise your right hands, repeat after me. I want to be found by strangers on the internet. You do. You want to be found by strangers on the internet. You want to be found by the right strangers. You want to be able to discern the good strangers from the bad strangers. But you're really going to tell, I can't stand here and tell you guys, you can only learn from people in your face-to-face worlds. That's it. You can't learn with people who are out there online. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous. And yet, schools are the only places in my kids' lives where they can't tap into their networks. They can't access their information, the people that are in their lives, in order to help them learn. It's not I don't think this is difficult, but it's something that we as educators have to get our brains around. And we have to play online with other people who we don't know. Because if we can't contextualize this for our kids, who's going to do that? Their peers? That will not end well. They also have access to 2 million apps in the App Store. Woohoo! And most of these are crap. The average lifespan of an app on the App Store now is about 2.5 weeks. Goes up and down, up and down. But if you don't have a good network, good luck figuring that out. That's not, you need strangers on the internet to help you figure out what works and what doesn't work. So look, welcome to it. This is the world in which we now live. And you may not like it. It may make you uncomfortable. It may make you angry. You may wish it would go away. It's not going away. And this is the world in which the kids you serve live when they leave you. And this is the world they will continue to live in once they graduate from this place, whether they go to university, whether they go into a profession, whatever else. This is the world today. It is not a scarce world. This is an abundant world. And the question becomes, are we helping our kids with the skills, literacies, and dispositions that they need to flourish in this world, in the one that they're living in? So that's the new reality. And again, it's a struggle. It's a real struggle for schools. It's a monumental struggle in a lot of ways for schools to wrap their brains around this and really get to a point where they embrace it instead of trying to resist it. And so this is the world in which we live, and I want to introduce you to Nate. So Nate is a 7-year-old podcaster. He's a very cute podcaster, obviously. And he has a show, a regular show on iTunes called The Show About Science. And about once a month, Nate posts an interview with some scientist or some expert around the world. On this particular one, I don't know if you can see it, the numbers are kind of small, but I downloaded, or I screen capped this a couple days after he posted this episode. He had 2,500 downloads in just 2 days. This kid has an audience from around the world. I'm going to play you a little bit about show number 26, which is the Biology and Tarantula Hawks with Coyote Peterson episode. I know you're going to listen to the whole thing, but I can only play a snippet, so sorry about that.
We're excited for another episode of Show About Science. This is your host, Nate, and today we're going to interview Coyote Peterson. I've been waiting for this for so long, and now it's finally happening. Yay, this is going to be an awesome episode about animals, so stay tuned for a tarantula hawk.
All right, there you go. Kind of a boring kid, not a lot of passion or energy or anything, right? But this is what he does. And basically, he is really thinking hard about science. And he does this podcast because he wants other people to love science. And by the way, there's not a 7-year-old in your school that couldn't do this from a technical standpoint. He doesn't need any special equipment to do this. He could do it on his phone if he wanted to. The question is there the opportunity to do that for the kids who want to do that? And do they have the opportunities not to just do podcasting, but to do all sorts of other good stuff? Because like Nate, I think a lot of our kids are creators, they're sharers. I mean, those kids that I walked around your primary school today, seeing all sorts of amazing stuff that kids are making and just, imaginations running wild and all that kind of stuff. So basically, he, I think, in many ways represents the potential of this moment when it comes to learning and creating. He is your new reality, and I think you have to think about every child in your classroom being like Nate, potentially, because that is their potential, that they can learn on their own, interview people who are experts and great teachers, create stuff, share stuff with an audience, and Nates are everywhere. Sasha, who wrote a book on coding for girls, took it to a number of different editors, got turned down by every single one of them, so went to Kickstarter instead and said, hey, I need $5,000 in order to publish this, and within a month had gotten $17,000 in donations, published it out on the web, and now you can download her book, you can buy her book if you like. Or my favorite story, this kid from India who's really upset about the fact that there were so many attacks happening in his community that he decided to create a shoe that if you're wearing it and you get attacked and you kick the attacker, it will electrocute him. And basically, you can see the battery sticking out on the side there. He's got a little work to do on the design. But I love what he said. He goes, the invention process was an uphill climb. I got mentors from LinkedIn and social media. I taught myself programming. My prototype failed 17 times. I faced electrocution twice. My friend got a nosebleed. I mean, this was not easy work, But at the end of it, he said, I felt like a superhero when I finally developed a prototype that worked. Nothing to do with school. Nothing. So, this is it. Learning is leaving the building. It is not stuck between the walls any longer. And in my kids' lives, they're doing more learning outside the walls than they're doing inside the walls. If we're defining learning as wanting to learn more, they're doing a whole bunch more of that stuff on their own than they are inside the classroom. And this is it. This is what makes this so challenging, because there has never been more agency in the hands of the learner to learn than there is right now, ever. There has never been a more amazing time to be a learner, ever. And people are starting to figure this out. This was a recent survey. I'm not sure about these numbers, but you get the drift. We are now turning to our technology to pursue the things that we have a passion for more often than not. And that's a good thing. It's a challenging thing to schools. It's a different thing. But this is, I love living at this moment. I love being able to learn in the ways that I can learn, and I love seeing my kids have those affordances as well. And by the way, given the reality of all that information, all those people, all those technologies, if there was one skill as educators, parents, whoever, that we would look at the kids in our classrooms or our own kids and say, I can only give you one skill, God, I hope it's that you can learn. I hope it's that you're a learner. Because imagine sitting and waiting in this world to be told what to learn, when to learn it, how to learn it, and how you're going to be assessed on it. Imagine that mindset in this moment. Those kids are not going to flourish. So, you think you know what education is? It is in shift. Literacy, my goodness, there's no better example of how challenging this is than with literacy right now. Skill Global Ready, I love that phrase. It's all in perpetual beta. We're all figuring it out as we go. And if we think we've got it down, we're not being honest with ourselves. We're not understanding the contexts and how they have changed. Inside a school, 32% of kids say they're engaged. And this is the school cliff that Gallup talks about. And the numbers are the same every year that they do this. Starting in 3rd, 4th grade, the engagement numbers start to take a dive. And I heard it from that parent last night. And basically, this is, because we get more and more proscriptive. We get narrower and narrower. I mean, 5-year-olds, their tails are wagging nonstop. They just want to learn everything there is to know. What happens between 5 and 15? We narrow it and narrow it and narrow it. And basically, that's what happens. And now we have happiness lessons for kids because there's so much stress. We have kids painting rocks to one another saying, you are not your SAT score. You're okay. We have girls starting petitions at one of the most prestigious public schools outside of Chicago saying, hey, administration at Naperville, stop. You're putting us all on one narrow path to success that most of us cannot stay on. And on the face of it, it's ridiculous to suggest that you can take hundreds of diverse individual children and try to make them come to the same outcome. It's ridiculous to even suggest that, but that's basically an affect of scarcity. Graduation rates are up, yay. Readiness for college and career, down. Not shocked, because we haven't changed much. Basically, we're still on the path of preparing kids. My friend David Warlick says schools prepare kids really well for the 20th century. And the whole narrative around college is changing. It might be a little bit different for you guys because I don't know, I think 20% of your kids go to school in the States. I mean, right now in the States, it's $1.6 trillion in student debt. $1.6 trillion. For some kids, it is now a fact that going to college is a risk. It's a risk. Because they're coming out, they're not able to start families, they're not able to buy houses, they're not able to participate because of how much debt they have. And I don't get this whole idea that you have to go to college right after high school. Where is that written? Where is that law? My daughter, we kept saying when she was, and my son too, look, if you don't know what you want to do when you're done with high school, that's okay. You can save me $40,000 a year to figure it out. And so she took a gap year. And now she's on her 3rd gap year. And people are asking, well, when does it stop being a gap year? And I'm, But she's going to figure it out. She's been taking some courses, and she's going to figure it out. But this idea that we have to go right to college, and we have to just, I don't get it. I don't get what that is. Freshman year for free now. This is a new thing, basically, that's come out because of all the cost of college is going to make a lot of people innovate. So this basically, you can take tuition-free courses from high-quality providers online, and you can pretty much place out of your freshman year just by taking a test. Isn't that a great learning environment? That's a great learning experience, isn't it? Just pass the test, and you can get a free freshman year. Wonderful. And now a lot of people are looking and saying, wait, seriously? What does a college degree prove these days? And I love that first part. We have entered a prove-it economy in which codified skills are currency. It's no longer the world that says, well, you have this diploma and it's on your resume, so you must be a good candidate. Now it's like, what can you do? I don't care where you went to school. What can you actually do? Can you solve this problem that I have? Can you find problems that maybe I don't even know I have? Those are the types of skills and dispositions and literacies now that people are looking for more than where did you go to college? Because the diploma doesn't really tell us much. In terms of jobs, the robots are coming. Who knows how many jobs, but some. And the question is, will more be created? Automation will make us rethink the whole idea of jobs. Basically, all of these people are coming out and talking about this. I love this one, though. The most important thing you can learn in school is to learn now. And there's no question that the people who are continually learning, as you heard from the chairman of AT&T, if you don't spend 5 to 10 hours a week in online learning, you'll obsolete yourself to the technology. Or Satya Nadella, who says it's constant reinvention. In fact, there was a great article in Fast Company where he said, we don't have a know-it-all culture at our company any longer. I don't want a know-it-all culture. I want a learn-it-all culture. I love that. I think that's a great shift. What if schools were learn-it-all cultures? Where it wasn't just learning about the kids, by the way, but it was about you guys too. That you were constantly learning. That you were constantly figuring out, what was going on in the world, the things that you wanted to learn more about, all that kind of stuff. We now have technologies that are going to change a whole bunch of this stuff, right? We have a device now where if I'm wearing it in my ear and you speak German to me, I hear you in English, and I speak English back to you, you hear me synchronously in German. We have Olympic athletes who are winning medals, basically based on watching YouTube videos, and I'm going to apologize to the math teachers here really fast, but this is just representative of types of technologies now that have to make us have a conversation. There's some pretty little music here you can listen to if you like. And this isn't unique. So many, literally, if we are still in the mode of assigning 1 through 15 odd in the back of chapter 3, welcome to photomath. And the question, if you really want to get pushed, and we don't have time to talk about it, is that cheating? Look, I'm a big advocate for open phone tests. I'm not kidding. Why wouldn't we let kids use their phones when they're taking tests? If we're asking questions on tests that kids can use their phones to answer, then we're not asking good enough questions. It's ridiculous. Everywhere else in the world, you'd take out your technology and answer the question. But we say to kids, no, I can't do that. Ask better questions. Let them use their technology. Wouldn't you want to know that they are literate in using their technology to answer those types of questions? I think that's probably. Speaking of literacy, really challenging right now. I think you could make the case that almost all of us, if not all of us, are illiterate these days. When it comes to protecting yourself, when it comes to understanding how Google and Facebook now are using algorithms to kind of run your world, when it comes to your use of those tools. Fake news, kids can't figure it out, not even close. Most adults, not even close. They don't have crap detectors because guess what? Crap detection is not on the test. And when crap detection is not on the test, you see what happens? So basically, it's about, do we even understand how these technologies are impacting us? And again, there are a lot of people who say that's why we should just get rid of it, not use it, because that's not realistic. This is not realistic. We have to understand this. And if our kids don't have us to help them with it, then Twitter, basically. A lot of people in education use Twitter. They'll tell you it's their best professional development. How many people have a Twitter account in here, by the way? Anybody tweeting right now? I'm in trouble. But I'll say to you too, if you're interested in Twitter, you've heard of Twitter, you think Twitter might be an interesting thing to do, please don't wait for the Twitter workshop. Be more like that 8-year-old who learned Minecraft. Go learn Twitter. Go on YouTube. How do I use Twitter? Just be that self-directed learner that many of your kids are. Yeah, and there you go. So, anyway, I'm going to go pretty quickly now because I know I'm getting close on time. Okay, so let's talk about practice. So what does it look like? If you are taking into account what you truly believe about how deep and powerful learning happens, and if you are taking into account how the world is shifting in a learning context by increasing agency to kids and to learners in ways that I don't think anybody predicted even 25 years ago, then I think this is what it looks like in classrooms. Kids are doing work that matters. Kids have audiences that extend far beyond the classroom. They are doing real work for real purposes. They are starting with their questions. There is agency over, and I mean choice, not just in how to get to the objectives, but what the objectives are. And I know that that's a real push, right? Because that suggests that kids can kind of control what they learn and how they learn it. Well, I think we have to give opportunities for kids to do that because that's what they're going to do in their real lives. They're not going to have someone telling them all the time what it is that they need to learn next. So we have to move toward these types of cultures and basically wanting to learn more. That this is really the ultimate assessment for all of us. Do our kids, as they leave our classrooms, want to learn more about what we're talking about in class? And if not, are they learning it? Is it really happening for them? So Pam Moran's one of my favorite superintendents. I got 5 minutes. Pam Moran's one of my favorite superintendents. She's in Albemarle, Virginia. She's trying to change the culture. She's doing it by getting to yes. That's what she calls it. So here's Pam's story really fast. In the last fall, some kids that are middle school came to her and they said, Ms. Moran, our cafeteria seats are just so uncomfortable. Is there any way we could design something new? And she was like, okay. Because she wants to say yes as much as possible. 3 or 4 weeks later, I don't know what it was, she comes back into the school, she turns the corner, she hears power drills and hammers and all sorts of sawing going on and stuff, drills. And she turns the corner and she sees this and she's like, oh, wow, that's not really what I was expecting when you said you wanted to change the design of your cafeteria seating. But what the kids decided was, well, why not have tree fort on wheels? And basically, they have made 3 of these now. And the first thing she did was, of course, get the safety inspector in to look at this and say, it's not going to topple over on anybody, right? And he was like, no, it's all good. But I mean, that's cool. That's agency. That's saying to kids, there's a problem that you want to solve, go ahead and solve it. And it's not curricular. I get it. But at least it's problem solving in the real world that they're doing. I think that's really cool. And she says, in my district, creativity abounds, and we believe that getting to yes is step 1 in the process of redesigning every nook and cranny of the 20th century school. Every nook and cranny. Everything about it. Rana Park, just this great primary school down outside of Melbourne in Australia. Basically, they are developing a cryptocurrency because the kids said, what's Bitcoin? And can we do that? And the teacher said, sure, let's figure it out. And do you think the teacher knew how to develop a cryptocurrency? No, but they have a belief system at that school, and they have the conditions in classrooms where kids can pursue that stuff if they have an interest in it. And it's fascinating what these kids can do. These are 10 and 11 and 12-year-olds who are trying to figure out, well, what's the new currency for the world? Just a small little problem. Northern Beaches Christian School, building on children's national curiosities. And it's all about making, and it's all about just doing stuff. And this place is just amazing. But it's about, I love what they say, we've been very intentional in fostering a culture of self-directed, student-led learning, growing students to be high-capacity leaders and creative thinkers. Self-directed. They have agency. They have choice. And our job at Northern Beaches as teachers is to coach them, to help them raise to heights that they couldn't get to on their own, and, oh, by the way, to also help them make sure that they can do the things that the government wants them to be able to do. But it doesn't start there. It starts with the kids, which, by the way, is Dewey, Montessori, Malaguzzi, Piaget, all of those people who said, we got to start where the kids are. We can't expect 7-year-olds to come to us. Project-based learning all over the place, maker education all over the place. And finally, it's about you too, right? And I'm going to end with this. I just love this. This is Gary, who a couple months ago was down in Mexico running a professional development for a group of teachers. These are teachers that you're looking at. And basically, he gave them this. He said, basically, here is a Hummingbird's robotic kit and Snap programming language. Not going to teach you anything about it. You got 2 hours. Make a bird. Singing and dancing would be appreciated. That was it. And he walked away. And these women had never seen any of this stuff. But I want to show you what happened after 2 hours with this one particular group. It's a little bit long, but it's worth it. Just watch their faces, too. I just love that. I just love that. That's the one thing I love about Gary. Well, I love a lot of things about Gary, but I love the fact that Gary just creates conditions and says, here, try it. How many of you have been in a situation where you've stared at stuff where you have no idea what it is and you got 2 hours to make something out of it? Right? Imagine what kind of a learning experience that is and how rarely we get to experience that. So it's just a reminder, we're not just talking about kids here, we're talking about ourselves too. We're talking about our learning and how powerfully important our learning is here in this conversation. A lot about Art Costa's Habits of Mind that, it's not so much about content, it's really about these skills now that are the most important things, that you can think and communicate with clarity, that you can take responsible risks, that you can think independently, all those types of things. This is really the coin of the realm in this world because content is everywhere. It's everywhere. Content knowledge is just expanding at an enormous rate. It doesn't matter so much what you carry around in your head. What matters is what can you do in the world. So it's more projects, more questions, more agency, less teaching, more transparency, and it's happening really fast. Peel School District, 150,000 students. They are pushing out their belief statements and a whole bunch of really interesting changes in their classroom that are taking root. British Columbia, as a province, has eliminated 60% of its curriculum over the last 5 years because they're just saying, kids aren't learning it, number one, and we're teaching it just in case. And basically, it's everywhere now. So we're not going to teach it anymore. We're going to focus on skills. Colorado, now going to an apprenticeship, 3-day program for juniors. Any junior kid who wants to can take 3 days in the community at a job, come back to school for 2 days to learn how to do that job even better. And basically, the one thing that I think is really interesting now is that about 150 high-level independent schools across the country have now signed on to mastery.org, which is basically saying, in 2 years, we will no longer have a numbered transcript. We will not do numbers any longer, because numbers are insidious, grades are insidious, they don't show anything about what kids can actually do. And they're asking the question, what if the traditional high school transcript didn't exist? And you may think, well, 150 people, that's not much. They're going to colleges and universities already, and they're saying, get ready, and colleges and universities are getting ready. Because in a couple of years, it's going to be 250, and a couple of years after that, it's going to be 1,000 public schools, because people are just looking at the grading thing going, it's not working. It just doesn't work anymore. So, just really briefly, what do you believe? What do you know? And how does that inform what you do? I'll leave it with a quote from Seymour. Success in the slowly changing worlds of past centuries came from being able to do well what you were taught to do, but success in the fast-changing world of the future depends on being able to do well what you were not taught to do. Really appreciate your time. We've got a couple minutes for questions or comments. I know many of you are out of here at 5, which is like 2 minutes from now. Any comments, questions? Yes, ma'am.
So I'm very inspired by everything that you said.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments from anyone?
One thing which you sort of talked about, but I feel like we are confined by, especially in international schools,
Sure.
is this IB curriculum
Mm-hmm.
and how we can still allow our students to transfer to other schools and be potentially going to international universities if we take on the kind of changes.
Yeah, and I think it's a great question. Did you all hear it? Kind of the limitations, I don't want to use the wrong word, but the kind of the constraints, let's say, of an IB curriculum. And it's a great question, and it's a really hard question to answer. And I don't have a great answer to it. We were talking about it the other day. You know, I asked Simon and Amy, I said, what IB schools are doing really interesting things? And there aren't a lot. There are a couple in Brussels. I know that they've been doing some much more progressive things like that. But look, I would say to you this. Do what you believe as often as you can. Right? Find places. You can't convince me that, how many school days do you have? 160, 170? 190, 200, whatever, right? You can't convince me that in 190 days you can't find 5 days to do really interesting stuff with your kids, no matter what you're teaching. You probably can't convince me that you can't find 25 days, but let's start small, right? So just, if you believe it, then find places to do it. Find places. And look at what's happening in your primary schools, you know, and look at a lot of the stuff that's already happening in probably a lot of classrooms here. So do it when you can. I mean, change it up when you can. Give kids agency and choice and help them develop a more productive learning environment as much as you possibly can. The longer term, large scale change is really hard, and it's going to take a long time, and it's going to take a whole bunch of commitment and courage on your part, by the way, to figure it out. But I will also say this, you can't convince me that an IB school couldn't do really interesting learning almost all the time and still have their kids flourish on the test and go to great universities. Absolutely. It's just different. One more? Yes, sir. And then you can applaud. Sorry.
Someone like the cognitive scientist Daniel Willingham would, I think, say what you carry in your head matters a lot for thinking, what's in long-term memory. And I think you'd also say that skills are very context-specific. We don't have these general skills such as collaboration, creativity. Sounds as if you'd be against those views. Maybe.
Well, I don't think that, I'm not against content. I'm not. What I am against is just-in-case content, which I think is what so much of school is about. I look at my own kids' schooling, and I think probably 80% of what they were taught just in case you need this someday, you're going to get it now. If it was really about developing collaboration and cooperation skills and all those dispositions and stuff using content, I think that's would have been the emphasis, but it never was. It was just the content that was emphasized. So we're just going to go hope that works out. I mean, I hear what he's saying. I just don't buy into the whole E.D. Hirsch cultural literacy that here are the 1,000 things that everybody needs to know if they're going to be able to communicate and work with one another. I just don't buy that. Not in this world. I think everybody's got a different 1,000 things, to be honest with you. And I think the problem with content, just to end it with a Seymour Papert quote, is, Papert says, or said, now that you have access to all the content there is, what 1/1000th of 1% are you going to choose to be in your curriculum? And how are you going to know that 1/1000th of 1% is the right 1/1000th of 1%? So I don't disagree that we need content knowledge and shared experiences in order to work collaboratively and to do good work in the world. I don't disagree with that at all. But I think there's a different formula for that than what most schools are pumping out right now. And yeah. One more. Yep.
Yeah, one question. You showed us the American report card.
Yes.
We don't do this.
Awesome.
For many, many years we have written comments.
Good.
And so sometimes it's a bit, when we are always faced with these
Right.
old report cards to us.
Yeah, right. But there is a number that your kids have to get, right?
Have to get in the IB diploma.
Yeah.
Have to get in the
Yeah.
But we have kids from 3-year-old to 12,
Sure.
right?
Yep. And I think that's great. I mean, as minimal as you can make grades, I think if you were here for Alfie Kohn, you probably heard him say something similar to that too. But so I don't disagree with that at all. But yeah, there's probably a longer conversation to have about the assessment in and of itself and the quest for that test. I'm not sure how wonderful that is at the end of the day. But like I said, that's a longer conversation. If I'm going to stick around, I know some people have to leave at 5, so if you want to stay and chat, that would be great. But thanks so much. I appreciate it. Good luck with your work.